Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com, services for the global MedComms industry, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and associated businesses. You'll find lots of activities, lots of resources. So do go and have a look at MedCommsNetworking.com if you've not seen it. You'll find loads and loads of videos now at NetworkPharma TV, videos of meetings like this. So go and look at NetworkPharma TV. And you'll find it's something like 300 and something videos now. So lots of good content there, lots of activities happening all the time. Take a look at it and join us when you can and join in. Today, absolutely delighted to be talking about Veeva, and we're going to take a deep dive into Veeva. We're running a couple of different sessions in a so-called MedComms Forum, and you'll find the individual sessions recorded separately and posted on NetworkPharma TV later. So we're going to start by introducing Jon from Veeva, and he's got a presentation for us about the Veeva content platforms. We're going to then have a panel discussion which is going to involve Amy, Jill and Graham, but I'll let them introduce themselves after the presentation. So without further ado, Jon, I'm going to let you kick us off, introduce yourself and talk us through your presentation.
Great, thanks so much. And let me share my screen and just to make sure you're seeing the slides, correct? Okay, so first off, Peter, thank you for having me today, having all of us today. I'm looking forward to today. I think it'll be a lot of good content. It's been a long time in the making. So, and as Peter said, we got the 3 sessions. I'll be here for this one and the last one. And so this first one, we're really going to focus in on kind of the content landscape as a whole and doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Vault platform and, its role in the commercial space from life sciences, and how that, how your teams use it. By way of introduction, my name is Jon Fisher. So I work on our content partner team here at Veeva. Our content partner team works with agencies and freelancers like yourselves in supporting you in the use of Veeva, both on the content side, on the multi-channel side, so developing the content for the reps, as well as using the Vault platform, to get content approved, submitted, etc. Today we have a little over 650 partners globally, and it's a global team. So I'm based here in New York, and prior to joining Veeva about 4 years ago, I spent 10 years on the agency side, so very familiar with the the work that you and your teams are doing. Taking a look at what we're going to cover today. Few slides just on the content landscape as a whole. So sharing some data points that we've been able to get from our customers and their use of the platforms as a whole. And then diving into Vault, taking a look at where Vault plays a role in our commercial cloud landscape, and then digging into both PromoMats and MedComms a little bit further. And then, as Peter mentioned, we'll be going over into a panel discussion. Again, as Peter said earlier, feel free to send any questions in or comments in along the way, either via the Q&A or the chat, and we will come back to those later. So taking a look at the content landscape, right? 2020 was an interesting year all around. We're all well aware of that. And one of the things that we didn't know going into 2020 when everything happened with COVID, what did it mean for our customers? What did it mean for agencies? What did the amount of work look like? What was going to happen? And essentially, we kept hearing more and more work's being done, more and more content's being created. And now that we're through 2020 and well into 2021, we're ready to pay that off and look at the data behind all that. And the industry has been able to move at a tremendous pace. And if we look at these numbers, we've seen an 80% increase in content year over year. And obviously with COVID, there was the shift to digital, right? So we've gone to 3.5 times more digital content than print, and 15.6 million assets managed across the PromoMats platform. And that's up, I want to say, about 6 million from the end of 2019. So again, a lot of content being pushed through, and you guys are well aware of it because you're the ones pushing it through. When we talk about content and we talk about, how we can help from a customer perspective, getting content out to market faster, our vision is about increasing speed to market by 75%. And there's a couple ways we're looking at doing that. The first one being speed. So 2021 for us this year is really focused on getting modular content into the platform. So being able to work in a modular way from not only creating content, but also in the review and approval process. And in the later session today that I'm doing, I'm going to just scratch the surface about modular content as a whole, how we see that working and how we're working with our customers on rolling that out. Beyond speed is around scale. So again, being able to scale not only just in one market, but scale globally. Our customers are using PromoMats in a global manner across all of their markets. So being able to create content, but get the source files for content in there. So as a local market comes on board, for example, they can very easily leverage other tactics that we're creating without having to go and track down source files for a specific tactic or recreate the wheel again. And then intelligence is another big one, really data-driven content when we talk about this. And, that's talking about looking at some of the analytics around the use of content as a whole, but also looking at metrics around, the processes that customers are going through, the approval times, how many review cycles, things to that effect, to be able to give them data to react to, and also compare themselves to industry peers. And that brings in some content metrics. And this is something I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation around standard metrics as the actual feature within PromoMats, but it's allowed us to be able to start to have some of these content metrics. We had 350 plus customers participate in these numbers you see across both SMB and enterprise. And, we're seeing on average, across the 300,000 assets that it took on average 21 days to approve and 1 review cycle. Now, that's skewed a little bit as well. We always know that because, there's the work that's being done prior to it going in and prior to it going into final review. But this type of data is something that our customers have been asking for. And we introduced the ability to collect this data in 2020. And now we're able to start to report that data back. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to standard metrics. So digging a little bit further. So when we look at Veeva, Veeva has different roles within a life sciences organization. Today, we're focusing in on the commercial side. There is the R&D side as well, but we're just talking about commercial today. And when we look at the commercial cloud as a whole and how customers are using it, it really falls into these 4 buckets, right? So we have data, analytics, content, which is where we're focusing today, and then engagement. Data, it speaks for itself. It's all the different data pieces that help to drive a customer strategy and their data as a whole. Analytics, looking at how content's being used or what an HCP's prescribing data is, or what other things are going on beyond just the Veeva channels. Content, PromoMats and MedComms when we talk about the commercial space on the Vault platform, and that's where we're spending the time today. And then with engagement, that's all the stuff essentially. The easiest way to sum that up is it's the reps day-to-day use of Veeva from an account management perspective to being able to serve up content and such to the reps as a whole. But looking at the content bucket, we have PromoMats and MedComms, and a lot of times the question comes up, why 2 platforms there? What's the purpose of those? And when we talk about that, PromoMats is the longstanding product there. So PromoMats has been around longer. PromoMats has more customers, which we'll see as I go through the slides today. But MedComms was introduced to essentially be able to help to create that, almost a firewall between medical content and the promotional content. Our marketing is pretty straightforward. You can tell by the product names what it's geared towards. But when we're talking about MedComms, we're talking about field medical content, the med info teams, the med affairs teams, all the content that they use for customers that are using MedComms. So that's where that content's going to live. Scientific presentations, etc. On the PromoMats side, it's very much more on the promotional side of things. So this is where websites that are promotional in nature, anything branded, really, any tactics there, print, digital, etc., are all going to live in PromoMats. And they're going to go into PromoMats from a review and approval perspective, but there may be other features and functions within PromoMats that are taken advantage of to get that content out to whatever the channel may be. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics here, but the reality of it is, between both of these platforms, I essentially like to refer to them as sister products, sister platforms, because if you know one or the other, you can easily get in and do work in the one you're not as familiar with. There are some differences between them. We'll talk about those, but the use of them, and really the use of any of the Vault applications, once you know one, you can really figure out the rest. And again, diving a little bit further, why, again, those two vaults, compliance is a big one. I said that right at the start of it, right? So having that firewall between medical content and promotional content. Same thing, with governance, where I've been involved, even when I was on the agency side, with customers that were using one PromoMats that had their Med Affairs teams in, but also had the promotional teams in, it gets a little, tense at times, because you have these different teams that have different needs, have different wants for the system as a whole, and it makes it a little bit harder to actually, implement certain things. And that talks to the next bucket around configuration, being able to really tailor the use of each platform to the, main teams, the primary users of the systems. And roadmap wise, each PromoMats, MedComms, they have their own feature set. Some are shared across both, but they have their own roadmap, tailored to the audiences that they're specific to. And some things at a high level, and we'll be talking about a little bit more of these in the subsequent slides. But what are some of the things between the two? The top bullet on both is around the document types, the way things are classified, the workflows, the life cycles out of the box. They're tailored towards the audience, right? So on MedComms, it's much more towards the medical side of things, where on the PromoMats side, it's much more on the promotional materials and then getting that content out to the appropriate health authority. On the MedCom side, we have medical inquiry management. We'll go in more in depth about that and how that all works. And the ability for training too, so read and understood workflows out of the box. On PromoMats side, we have things like auto claims linking, standard metrics, two things we'll talk more about today. And then again, in the case of the US market, we had to implement functionality last year around being able to generate the electronic submission for 2253 to the FDA when they moved everything to electronic submission. So again, talking about that, the differences in roadmap, being able to drive that stuff forward accordingly. So diving into PromoMats specifically, one of the things we always say is, and it holds true for both MedComms and PromoMats, but really having those platforms become the single source of truth for content for our customers. On the PromoMats side, as I said, it's the promotional side of things, right? So, all content's going into PromoMats one way or another from a review and approval perspective, and getting that sign off before it goes off to the appropriate health authority. And then beyond approval, PromoMats has evolved to be more than just that review and approval tool. Content can actually be pushed from PromoMats out to various channels, whether it be the Veeva CRM channels. So again, channels that the reps are using on their iPads or other mobile devices, to other digital channels, websites, social media, etc. And we have an extensive partner network. I made mention early on about the team I work on, so that's our content partner team. But we also have a technology partner team as well, and those partners are creating integrations between our product, PromoMats, and/or MedComms, and either their product or a product they work very closely with. So that might be a content management system, or it might be a campaign tool of some sort. And the idea being, as PromoMats becomes that single source of truth with these integrations out to these other channels, and then we can also start to feed those insights back into PromoMats. So again, getting that use of content and how often content's being used and accessed to live right with it within PromoMats as a whole. And when we start to look at the features and functions, which I'll deep dive into a little bit here in these next slides, it really breaks down into these 5 buckets, right? So it's as far as the process of getting content, created, reviewed, approved, and then once it's approved, actually doing something with it. And we bucket those in both the share and publish categories. With create, review, and approve, those get lumped together, right? And I think it speaks for itself of why. But with PromoMats, again, it's a life sciences specific application. Veeva does have an audience, does have customers outside of life sciences. It's a very small part of our business today. But PromoMats, MedComms, those products are never going to change or evolve to work with those audiences. They will always remain specific to life sciences. Now, as you're all probably very well aware with both MedComms and PromoMats, just because there's things out of the box as far as workflows and document types and stuff, that doesn't mean that a customer just turns it on and uses it as is. A lot of times it is very customized to align with that customer's process. So you will see how one workflow works in one environment is completely different than another. And at the same time, what you have permission to and what you have access to is going to vary from customer to customer as well, depending on their governance and how they set up permissions on their side. One of the things that will always remain and no matter what permissions and stuff you have is around the real-time collaboration, right? That's always been important. It was important last year more than ever. Having the ability to be able to upload content in and having reviewers and other team members, no matter where they're sitting, being able to actually look and take part in the review process as a whole, and that's a big piece of it all. And beyond just being able to review from wherever you are, we're also building in additional tools from a collaboration perspective. So collaborative authoring, for example, is an integration we have with Office 365, and so that if an Office document, Word, PowerPoint, whatever, is uploaded into PromoMats, the teams can actually work on it within PromoMats collaboratively, you can see who's working on what, and all of those changes get automatically pushed back into the document within PromoMats. And then auto claims linking. So this is relatively new. And I say relatively because this was introduced in December of 2019. So right before the holiday break. A lot of momentum with auto claims linking coming into 2020. I was at our customer summit in December of 2019 in the EU, and a lot of conversation around this. All the sessions around it were full, and then COVID happened. And so the priorities from our customer perspective obviously shifted. So this kind of got put on the back burner. It's picking up steam again, and I think we'll see that continue throughout the rest of this year into next year. But essentially what it is, it has the potential to make all of your lives easier. At its foundation, it's the ability to build out a claims library in PromoMats. So a claim in the claims library is essentially the claim itself and any variations of that claim, the product and country that it's applicable to, and then whatever reference or references support that claim, whether it be a document reference or an anchor reference. Once that claims library is built out and those claims are approved, then it actually becomes usable in the submission process. And what happens there is when a document is uploaded, there's the ability to run a tool called suggested links. What PromoMats then does is goes out and looks at the content within that document, compares it back to the claims library, and anywhere there's a match for the content in that document back to the claims library, it's automatically going to create the annotation for that content back to the reference or references that are set up in the claims library. So again, a lot of you spend a lot of time in preparing things for submission, and on a large document, right? It's something that might take a half a day or a full day or sometimes even more than that. This isn't going to be a one-click and done solution by any means, but it may, depending on how robust the claims library is for that customer, it could cut down 25% of time, 50% of time, maybe a little bit more than that. But it's something that just makes your lives easier and makes the whole process even that much more repeatable. And on the other side of it, when it comes to review and approval, it's very clear to the reviewers what content was created by, or what annotations I should say were created by the auto claims feature, so that they know it's already based off an approved claim. Moving into sharing. So again, once content's approved, doing something with it. So we have a feature called Brand Portal, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple slides here. And then also with Veeva CRM. So it's an integration to be able to push content out to the field, to their iPad or their other devices, so that they have the content readily available to them to, when they're having conversations with HCPs. And with publishing content, again, getting content out to other channels. We have a feature called digital publishing, which allows for content to be able to push out to digital channels. So once content's approved, it automatically gets pushed out to a customer-owned environment, and then URLs are automatically generated that then can be used for whatever digital channel it may be. So the idea there being, if you think about SMPC or PI, for example, using digital publishing, once that URL is used anywhere, as the PI or SMPC is versioned in 6 months' time, once that new version is approved, wherever that URL was used is going to reflect the latest approved version without any work having to be done. Integration with Veeva CRM, again, we talked about that. And then that extensive partner ecosystem. So, we have a lot of integrations, and as your customers' use of PromoMats evolves into more than review and approval, some of those integrations will likely be surfaced to you. And again, those integrations may be something with the likes of Adobe Experience Manager, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, some other content management system. But the idea with those integrations being just getting the flow of content once approved into those channels that much more efficient. And then analyzing. Again, data is important, right? And we always have that kind of analytics view into everything that we do. So out of the box, PromoMats, MedComms both have real-time reporting and dashboards available to our customers to be able to see, whether it's just the status of content, where content's being used, things that affect, or with things like standard metrics. I talked a little bit about that in the beginning when I was talking about the content metrics. But to just summarize that up, essentially what standard metrics allows for is when content is uploaded into PromoMats, it automatically starts to track how many review cycles did it take for that piece to go through, how long did it take to get to approval, when was it actually marked as approved, and tracks all that stuff behind the scenes. That stuff is reportable from a customer perspective, so they can see how long things are taking. And beyond that, the reason we did this was the answer to the customer around how do they compare to their industry peers. And so now we're actually able to start to look at that data, give them, if they're an SMB, give them data back around their SMB peers so they can actually compare and start to look at some of that. So it's really just the beginning of this, because again, it was just rolled out last year. We just got kind of that first year of subs data in, and we're going to continue to evolve this, and you'll start to see more and more of this and the outcome of it. And in summary around PromoMats, just to give you an idea of reach. So there's 400 plus life sciences customers today that use PromoMats across over 165 plus countries. That 9.6 million jobs, as you saw from the earlier slides, that's actually out of date. So that's more closer to 16 million at this point. And from an agency perspective, you're in a large universe of agency users. There's 5,000 plus agency users of PromoMats from over 2,000 agencies. So the reason I say that is we consider the agency users a primary user of PromoMats and MedComms. So that's why we like to do things like we're doing today. We welcome the feedback. We've had road shows where we've gone around and talked to agency users and actually have taken that feedback into account and brought that forward into future roadmap changes. All right, and then jumping into MedComms, and then we'll get over to the panel discussion. Just taking a little bit closer look of what's what's there for MedComms. And again, the idea being it's that end-to-end, you know, content management for the scientific content specifically. Again, the collaborate, approve, manage, share, and publish, very similar to PromoMats side. We have the same type of diagram for the PromoMats side. It's all about the content creation process and us having a tool that allows for, you know, it to be used across the board. Core capabilities from MedComms perspective, it really becomes that central hub for all medical affairs. It allows for, you know, efficient collaboration, review, and approval. And where I was talking about brand portal, we also have a product called medical portals. And again, both brand portal and medical portals, the idea behind them is it allows for you to surface content in a way that it's almost a e-commerce like storefront. It lives within MedComms and or PromoMats. The content isn't duplicated. It doesn't need to be uploaded again, but you can essentially surface content for different audiences, so it's easy to find the content. Again, there's an integration with Veeva CRM, and we have that real-time progress tracking across the lifecycle as a whole. The idea, again, here with MedComms is it being that single source of truth. So where does the content that go into MedComms wind up living? It may go out to the field, you know, for field medical discussions, onto medical information websites, into Q&A, journal articles being pushed out from MedAffair or from MedComms, I should say, and then whatever, you know, scientific platform that that customer might be using, the content for that being served up from MedComms as well. And again, that single source of truth. So you see Veeva CRM on here as well. We have a medical CRM specific product that MSLs and such use with our customers. And so again, that content's being pushed out either to CRM, other digital channels, and driving the conversation with the customer at the end of the day. And with MedComms, you know, the idea is that it's, you know, and this fits really for PromoMats too, but it's complete, it's connected, it's modern, and it's fit for purpose. And, you know, with all of these, there's, you know, specifics around them. But one of the things I always like to call out is the modern one, because again, in this space, a lot of times, especially historically, you know, these tools, they become dated very quickly. We have a release cycle that we have 3 major releases a year. And in those, you know, we carve out a percentage of roadmap items for customer requests. And then we carve out a percentage for innovation as well. So you'll constantly see change, just like I was talking about on the PromoMats side, like things like auto claims linking, for example, and modular content, which we'll be talking about later today. You'll constantly see that change coming to these products and keeping them fresh and useful. And one of those things, and I'm not going to go too much in depth in this, but one of the features that I wanted to really call out, because it may come into play in the work that you're doing, is around medical inquiry management. So this is a newer feature that was brought into the MedComms platform, and it allows for MedComms to be the central hub in the sharing of and the facilitating of any medical inquiries. So the Med Affairs teams, the inquiry can come into MedComms. They can manage the case within the MedComms environment. And being that MedComms has all of the content, they then can, when it comes to the management of that case, choose content that already exists and fulfill that case and send it off. Or, you know, if there's the need for content that may be missing, flag that and then have that content created, go through the appropriate life cycle once approved, and then send that off. And then again, have all of that insights. So again, relatively newer, we have 20 plus customers that are using this today that have replaced their own other internal systems or third-party systems to kind of really bring this full circle and have this in. You know, from an agency perspective, where you would see, you know, kind of involvement come into play is if your team's building, you know, a third-party website that's handling medical inquiries, you might be integrating with this to input those, or, you know, creating the content to fulfill any of these as well. And just to give a comparison as far as the difference between MedComms and PromoMats, as I said very early on, MedComms is a newer product, but its reach has grown significantly. If we were having this conversation this time last year, I think the number where we see 140 plus was 80 plus. 17 of the top 20 pharma are using it. 3.7 million documents have been managed within the MedCom platform. And like I said, 20 plus today are managing their medical inquiries using MedComms as a whole. Again, I knew I threw a lot out there. My email address was on the first slide. It'll be shown again in the later session. Feel free to reach out with any questions, but let's kick it over and we will go to the panel discussion.
Fantastic, thanks. Thanks, John. There was a hell of a lot of information in there. And certainly for someone like me who's been around a long time and you know, I don't do MedComms anymore. So I come from the days when we had job bags floating around systems like, you know, by the ton and faxing each other bits and pieces of paper and LibreArch files full of carefully marked up yellow highlighted references, which we then lost and all the rest of it. I mean, I sit here and I'm just a little bit thinking, wow, this is amazing. But I'm intrigued how it works in practice. I'm absolutely delighted that for today we've been able to be joined by 3 MedCom specialists who work, who do have, but you work in slightly different ways, which I'm going to try and draw out in a minute, but you work with the Veeva platforms. And I'm just interested how it works in practice. I know John's very interested to get as much feedback as possible. So that's partly from the discussion, but also to the audience, please do. You've got a chat button, you've got a Q&A button. Just send us any comments, any observations, any thoughts as we talk through this. We'll try and answer some of the questions, but partly what we're doing today is just collecting you know, sort of thoughts from the crowd, as it were. And John will be very happy to hear from you afterwards. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Amy, you're first. Quick introduction and just a little bit of how you interact with Veeva.
Sure, thanks Peter and John for the presentation. So yeah, so I'm Amy. I've been a medical writer at Langland for almost 2 years. Prior to that, I worked actually in-house in medical information at Alliance Pharmaceuticals. And at the moment, my role in Veeva together with the client services team is to collaborate to get the content approved and into the systems for our clients to use.
Excellent, thanks. And Amy, I'm going to tease this one out just to make a point of this, is at Langland, you also get involved, is that right?
That's right, everyone has to pull their weight. Client services and medical writers alike. Yes, that's right.
Okay, which is, I just want to make that point because of what we'll then go on to talk about. So Jill, I'm going alphabetically. Jill, you're next. Just explain your position.
Yes, so I run JK MedComms Assistance and there's 6 of us. We're based in Oxford and we concentrate solely, well, almost solely on referencing, which is usually within Veeva for the most part. So that's almost all we do. And yeah, we're very busy. So that's
okay. And by definition, you work across a whole bunch of different agencies and pharma clients. So you're seeing different ways in which they're using that. Graham, go on, same question to you. Introduce yourself and how do you interact with Veeva?
Hi everyone. Yes, so we do at FisherWhack something which sounds like it's halfway in between what Amy and Jill described. Our medical writers at FisherWhack know to send things into our services department so that we can manage and take work that's ready to go into review and upload it efficiently and then kind of manage and track the review process.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm making the point, but it's obvious that you 3 are working in different ways with Veeva platforms, which is representing the fact that I get the impression that lots of agencies and clients are working with Veeva in different sorts of ways. So you must be faced with situations where, I don't know, you've got half a dozen clients in an agency, they're all working with Veeva in different sorts of ways. How does it, and from all of your points of view, let's just have a quick viewpoint from your points of view. And I'm going to go backwards now. I'm going to start with Graham. How does it get translated? If you're working with a new client, say, just help me understand a little bit what happens. How do you find out how your new client is going to work with Veeva?
Sure.
If I can just keep it as broad as that. You see what I mean?
So one of the first things we ask ourselves when we find out one of our clients has work that they need to start to put through Veeva, or it's an entirely new client who kind of already interacts with it and needs our support, we ask ourselves, how much do they know? In many cases, the client is new to the system, so they're learning at the same time as they're already passing us work to put through the system. So as John touched on, the system is customizable for each client, and one of the first things we look at is what exactly do they need to do with the system? What does the system look like from their side? What's their interface? Because there are many things that they'll be able to do that perhaps another client won't be able to. We manage our own kind of set of SOPs internally that we have, so that any one of our kind of Veeva experts or project specialists can kind of pick up that and work with that new client specifications on top of what they already have, which is a kind of a base level of knowledge as to how the system functions.
Again, I'm the ignorant one here, so just help me a little bit, okay? But if the clients are using it in different ways, have they got different language that they're using? Have they got different naming approaches and so on? How much do you guide them, and how much do they tell you what they're going to do?
Good question. In an ideal world, we would be guiding our clients entirely, but I don't think we live quite in that ideal world yet. So we typically take from our clients, when we begin working with them in Veeva, a set of whatever process documents they have, which they will kind of disseminate to their agencies. I'm sure Amy and Jill have seen the same thing. We will then kind of build into that anything that we need to in terms of how can we on our team best work with that system. We are designed to be flexible, so it tends not to be too much of an issue. When they say, for example, let me think of an example that one client might not have compared to another one. Core claims, not all of our clients use them in the same way. So from our point of view, it's really just a case of knowing what they need and having conversations with them where we identify areas where they might not have kind of thought of what happens next in this situation. So one of our clients uses core claims optionally. And one of the things that we'll do when we're looking to manage their account is kind of establish exactly when and where and how they want to use certain features of the system. So this kind of builds into what questions that I might have later if time permits, about how we can kind of come to a consensus on the best ways to use the system. But perhaps I would be overstepping my remit to go into that at the moment. But we broadly find that it's a really useful system. Of course, Jon's numbers back that up. Our clients use it in different ways. It suits us as an agency to kind of treat them as separate entities to a certain extent. It's not a one-size-fits-all system, as I'm sure Jon will attest to.
Okay. And I'm going to move on. Jill, same sort of basic question, but again, I'm fascinated by this basic idea that everyone's using this in a different sort of way. And Jill, you work with a whole bunch of agencies, apart from anything else, who are working with a whole bunch of clients. So does what Graham says resonate with you? But effectively, you must see it on a bigger scale because, everyone's doing it in different ways.
Yeah, but thankfully, with regards to the referencing process, there isn't too much variation.
Okay.
There is a little bit sometimes, you'll log into a client site and it's very slightly different, or there might be certain ways a client likes things done. We're kind of reliant on the agency to tell us. We do have a little checklist that we'll ask if we haven't been told otherwise of, certain questions that we need to know. But for the most part, thankfully, the referencing process is pretty consistent across all the platforms, so it's not too much of a problem for us.
Okay. So that's good. Amy, what about from your point of view? Same basic question. How do you find it?
It definitely depends on the client and also how established they are as a company and how many resources they already have, and the content that they're trying to migrate over, for example, for Veeva, can really distinguish how they decide to approach it. But more often than not, we do come into the process once Veeva is already training them, in which case we don't necessarily have the opportunity to interact with them and give them, our point of view and the experiences that we've had with the system and how we think would be best to progress. So it is often that we already end up there sitting in the training and just having an SOP sent to us, for example, on Veeva. So I think we're missing maybe that step where we can probably provide our experience of working with so many companies and so many different approaches to Veeva that we could support them in utilizing as best they can, really.
Okay, and sorry, can I just pick up on that point about training, and just for my purposes again to understand it, if are you involved as an agency in the Veeva training for that client, or are they trained and then they tell you what to do and they give you the SOP?
So from our experience, what normally happens is we will sit into the training with the client. So it will, the training usually will go through, for example, how a medical reviewer would go through the system. And so we sit through on that. And then we are then obviously briefed on which aspects of that we're expected to to be responsible for. So that's, for example, somewhere where would be quite advantageous to maybe not necessarily always have the training with the client, but with Veeva on our own to sort of understand with more detail our responsibilities within the system and how we can best support the client in their review processes, for example. Yeah.
Okay. And Jon, I'm gonna focus mainly on the comments from the three panelists here because I'm trying to get this real life experience. But you jump in if you want to, and you say, well, that's not how it's supposed to work, or something, because that's also an interesting sort of point if that came up. So I'm gonna keep going with my logic for the moment. And we've got different clients working with it in different ways, and it's interesting to hear your comments on that. But you've also got different agencies working on the same project with the client, for instance. And part of the beauty, as I understand it, of Veeva is, I'm being obviously simplistic here, but the reference library is there, the claims library, whatever. So it's 6 different agencies could all be using it in very similar sorts of ways. Again, is that actually what happens in practice? Graham, you were smiling slightly there. Sorry, I'm leading you into that one, but that's an area where I find it fascinating. Different agencies using the around a single project. How does that work in practice?
I guess from our perspective as an agency, our approach, as I mentioned earlier, is that we manage kind of the review processes within our editorial department, as opposed to having our medical writers or project managers do that. It leaves them free to do the heavy lifting where their skills are best applied. Medical writers work on the content, they pass along to us for upload to Veeva. For us, this might be something that Jill has seen too, that requires a kind of extra step, which we need to manage carefully. Medical writers need to mark things up for us, or otherwise give us instructions as to how they want us to put things into the system. It still works out for us to be more efficient, but it needs to be managed carefully. With agencies, of which I don't have experience, where the medical writers, like Amy, would do the whole Veeva process themselves after the content is developed, I guess for them, that adds an extra level of learning, which at our side, it's kind of enclosed within our department. We don't find necessarily that it's advantageous. It's the way we've always worked with similar review platforms on our side. So I guess I'm beginning to waffle.
Sorry, no, don't worry. And I think, sorry, my question was more about if you're working on a project and there's 6 agencies working on different aspects of that project or something, does it work the way I understand it's supposed to work, in terms of you all working in the same way so that you're referencing your markups are similar? Or is there an inevitability about the fact that, again, different agencies will approach it in different ways? Or who dictates how it's working? Or is the client, the pharma client, giving you an SOP that you all just work to, and therefore it works perfectly? I'm not sure you quite answered that bit of the question, which I was asking.
Sure. So again, it would vary from client to client in terms of how they want to work with their agencies. One thing we don't see at Fisherwack is different agencies working on the same materials as us for the same client in the system. We will see evidence of other people from other agencies, for example, uploading references to the library and working on different projects that we access. So many of our clients will kind of distribute their SOPs to their agencies as a kind of a blanket. Here's how we work with Veeva approach. We have 1 or 2 clients who seem only to work with us on the system. They're the clients, and they happen to be these clients of ours. In the early stages of using the system, they will have had the usual introductions from Veeva to the system, the usual kind of guide to how it works. And then it will be between us and them to decide how best to use the system for your needs.
Okay.
For example,
sorry. Well, I was okay. I'm getting the picture, and I don't want to sort of like get too bogged down in this. But Jill, from your point of view, let's take referencing. Again, part of the point here is the reference library is there. Manage it in a sensible sort of way. Everyone does the same thing, and it should solve all sorts of problems. Is that what you see in practice?
Yes, sort of. I mean, I think that the trouble is the agency might be, there might be, 100 agencies on one client site, or possible more than that, and they may have been trained, but since then additional new team members are added, and lots of changes happen. So I think you do get lots of maybe newer people will add references to the library that have markups, and it can all get quite messy, but it's really client dependent on how well they manage that. Some of them manage it really well and are quite strict about what they allow and don't allow to be uploaded, whereas others it's kind of more of a free-for-all, so it gets quite messy. Okay,
let's move on a little bit, and Amy, let's bring in terms of support. If you are dealing with Veeva? I mean, and I'm blunt question. You know, John, as I say, you can say if it's supposed to work differently. But Amy, you know, what sort of support do you get if you're sitting there and going, oh my God, I'm not quite sure what to do with this? You know, is it easy to get the support from, or do you go to Veeva, or do you go to the pharma client in the first place? And what sort of support is there when you're in that position?
It depends a bit on the query, but we do actually use the Veeva helpline quite often, and we're quite pleased with it as well. We do get responses really quickly, and often it's actually quite beneficial because we'll solve things before clients realize they're a problem, which is always an advantage. So that's always quite handy. But mainly, I think it has to do with authorization of doing certain things that then we will then go to the client. So whether that's approving references, or approving a job bag even, or moving it from one reviewer to another. These are the kind of things that then we obviously are much more specific to the client, and therefore we will contact them rather than Veeva.
Okay. And I'm going to bring you in, John, actually. I mean, what is the intention? I mean, you've got the helplines and so on. So in a few words, I mean, where would you be pointing the agency people at if they've got queries?
Yeah, so again, on a couple of these points, it really depends on the customer. So like even going back to training, for example, when they purchase PromoMats, you know, we obviously help with implementation, and then depending on how far that we go into that, really depends on the customer. We have services partners, so they may, you know, purchase licenses from us, but then integrate or work with a services partner to actually roll out what their process and stuff looks like. The one thing I will say on that, Amy, you know, like you were saying, when you come into the process, a lot of times that stuff's already established. You know, always provide the feedback, especially to the business users, because a lot of the times, you know, that change is going to happen over time. Because when it's rolled out initially, you know, business users, especially if they're new to the platform, are answering questions from IT owners that they don't necessarily know what that's going to translate to, but there needs to be that evolution of the processes and stuff over time as a whole. When it comes to support, that varies too from customer to customer. When it gets into very customer specific things, so Amy, like you were saying around, you know, just permissions of having access. If you went to Veeva support, you know, we would be able to look and see, you know, well, you don't have the permissions that, but ultimately that goes back to the customer as far as something they need to address. If it's system outages or system type problems, our support team will certainly help, or, you know, even guide to best practices. And then beyond that, you know, we have our team as well. So, you know, we have, if, you know, your agency does a lot of this work and you wanted the, you know, direct line to be able to pick up and ask the question to anybody, that's those 650 plus agencies that we have as partners. That's, you know, what they're doing. And then we also have, you know, the certification as well. But, you know, those are both optional. But, you know, from a very, you know, kind of direct the support route, you know, Veeva support will get you, you know, direction one way or the other of, you know, is it a configuration thing? Is there a help document online that can help you with that? Or is it something else that you need to engage the customer with there? So.
Okay. And we've got a number of questions coming in, which are very specific sort of practicalities of using Veeva, which to be honest, I'm going to skip over because I don't want to get bogged down in that. But again, to reinforce what I think you just sort of said effectively is any questions, you know, you're very happy, John, aren't you, to hear from anybody, and you can direct them in various directions and so on stuff. But it may be something we could do on a separate occasion. But if we keep this as generalities about using these platforms in practice, can I turn again to the panelists and just say, look, and this is you know, we've not set anything up here, so I don't know what you're going to say actually, but you know, give us a couple of the sort of questions that you in your position have about using Veeva, that, you know, use this opportunity to throw a couple of key questions. Jill, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just bouncing around, but Jill, have you got a couple of things? What are the sort of practical issues out in the world of MedComms that you think would be worth airing? Even if we don't answer them now, can we air them? You're on mute, Jill, you're on mute.
I'm not ready yet. Could you come to me last?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I wasn't trying to put anyone too much on the spot. Amy, I'm going to go to you then. Go on. Have you got a couple of things? I don't know how long this list could be. So let's just keep it with some key ideas. Amy, go on.
I think to go back to the references, actually, I think it is quite an interesting dynamic when you have so many agencies, and not only agencies actually, because clients will have their local affiliates working on the content as well, so or the reference libraries or the claims documents. So I I think that can be quite challenging sometimes to make sure that, you know, that there's a QC process in there and I think that's why a lot of, for example, some companies will have will request that they approve the references to avoid these sort of issues happening. So I think that's something that can sometimes be quite challenging. And I think it comes down to be completely honest, with how those SOPs and those procedures are written in the first place. And I think Jill touched on that briefly, that, you know, sometimes you'll get very good briefs of how they want to approach the system, and other times they're not necessarily that clear. So if all agencies get a slightly vague brief on how to approach the system, then we sort of can start trying to implement our own processes to support ourselves in using the system, which can get a bit messy. So yes, I think having Veeva possibly, or having, you know, the opportunity to recommend to clients that they set out as clear as possible their procedures so that they can be as harmonious across both internally with their affiliates and with their agencies, I think would be really advantageous.
Okay, that seems a fair point. Jon, just on that point though, just to clarify again for me, how much guidance do you give to a pharma client or whatever the main client as to how they implement and how they develop the SOPs, or are they really left to their own devices in reality?
It really varies from customer to customer. So we have, you know, on the one slide I showed earlier in the commercial cloud, we had our business consulting team under that. So we have services around that they can engage with us, and, you know, business consulting will actually look, even if it's an established customer, they'll look at their processes and see, you know, globally, how are things actually operating? Where are their efficiencies? Where can their changes need to be made? But at the same time, they might be working with some of our services partners as well to do that similar stuff. So, you know, but one of the things from a Veeva perspective, I can say is, you know, things like reference documents, right? I've seen it when I was on the agency side. It comes, some customers are managing it really well. Some customers, you know, it's kind of wild, wild west. But it comes down to, you know, we have given them the ability to, at a granular level, you know, control who can actually upload reference documents, if they can create or manage anchors and stuff on those reference documents. And the more they leverage that and kind of put some governance around things like reference documents, the better that becomes. And one of the things that I talked about earlier with auto claims linking, the auto claims linking in tandem almost brings forward a cleaner reference library, because as that claims library is built out and linked to references, it eliminates the need for the, you know, as a new agency comes in and uploads something, to now upload a reference document again, or not go and find the one that already exists, because they're going to be going based off the claims library as well. So okay, that makes sense. We ought to be wrapping up, but I want to bring Graham in next. Have you got something that you would sort of air at this point in the same sort of spirit?
Sure. I mean, just to mention, as Jon mentioned earlier in his slides, there's a focus on speed to market, and that's the major pinch point for our clients when it comes to using Veeva. Very often when they're new to us, they have a lot of questions around why does this take so long, or perhaps even why are you billing so much, until they kind of get used to what it takes to kind of push something through the system, through all the reviews and referencing and so on. So rather than kind of making suggestions at this point, as you said, we don't need to get into the kind of brass tacks of things. But one thing that we have seen recently that's helped us with this massively, especially over the last 18 months when we've seen a big shift to digital and a lot of video that we didn't see before, is that the simple act of using the system has sped up. We used to find that things were slowed down, possibly because of servers struggling to cope with the volume of traffic moving through them. That seems to have gone away. It used to be that we would start our day in the UK, and as soon as our colleagues in the US and other US users would log on around 2 p.m. our time, that's when the system would kind of start to kind of judder a little bit. And it's good to know that kind of changes are being made to make sure that we can get things through the system as efficiently as possible. I mean, this is a basic situation, I imagine, with servers, although I admit I'm not an IT specialist. It would be nice if we could kind of get more information going forward as to what initiatives are moving forward to speed up the efficiency of the system, and the auto claims linking is a great example of that. Yeah. Okay.
So one thing, just I'll use that comment as a shameless plug. So the last session we'll be talking about UI updates. So the Vault UI as a whole is going through a complete refresh. That's going to be first introduced in our August release this year, with the idea of speed. So you'll see kind of where the interfaces change and a lot of that stuff is coming to play. And, you know, as far as, you know, what's coming in, I've seen some of the other questions along those same lines for that education. And, you know, this is something that Peter and I have talked about over time. I mean, I think, you know, coming out of today's session, when things fire back up in September, we can kind of get a regular cadence where, you know, I come and talk to you guys, you know, through this channel regularly, just to kind of tee up some of the things that are coming and things that you need to be aware of as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be really, really useful. Jill, I'm going to bring you in now. Did you want to just sort of, if you're able?
Yeah, I did just have one question actually. So if as we're using the system, we have kind of feedback or things that, you know, we think could be changed. I know that there's a portal on the website where you can enter feedback, but I don't know if that's available to agencies. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the customer portal. Yeah, it's not available to agencies unless you are a partner, but I mean, we still will take the feedback. So I mean, I'll be sharing my email address in the next session that I'm in. It's in a couple slides there, and you know, Peter will have it. It'll be on the recordings. You know, you can feel free to send that stuff along as well, and we'll pass it on. I mean, I will be very transparent that, you know, while we have the 3 releases a year, depending on how big of a lift something is, if it's, some things are considered just a little bug fix, right? So if it's adding a button to account for something, that might just go in as a bug fix. If it's a larger initiative, if, you know, there's customer ask and customer drive behind it, make sure you provide that anytime you provide feedback, because that'll bubble it up higher on the roadmap list. But yeah.
Okay, no, cool. But this is, I mean, it's fascinating watching you and listening and thinking about how many more questions we could talk about and little rabbit holes we could go down, all sorts of things. And some of the questions that come in are really quite interesting. And I'd just say to the audience again, please just send all these questions in, because we're collecting them and thinking about them. And you know, today was to try and give us a flavour of the situation, and for someone like me, just an understanding of the system. But absolutely brilliant, Graham, Jill, Amy, thank you, because just listening to you talk a little bit about using it in practice, I think is interesting, and I hope it will make us all have a bit of a think. Important point as I wrap up now is that if I know the 3 panelists, I'm saying 3 panelists, Graham, Jill, Amy, you're very happy to hear from people via LinkedIn if anyone wants to reach out to you. The more we can all share our thoughts and experiences, I think the better in the community. Jon, huge thank you to you for coming over and talking and making that very clear offer that you're very happy to hear from people, and you are the right person, as it were, to you know, for people to contact if they've got questions, even if it's a question of you then pointing them in the right direction. But generally, if we can open up the communication line between MedComms and Veeva for the sorts of challenges that specifically happen within MedComms, I think there'll be a huge amount of appreciation of that. So hopefully we can, between us, we can do that. So a little bit longer than I wanted, but let's I think that was full of good stuff. I'm going to say a big thank you to all of you. Again, please, anybody watching this, contact these guys via LinkedIn or whatever, and I'm going to ask you to give us a wave, and I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you very much. Bye bye.